If you think you're trans, explore that. Figure it out. You might not be. You might be. But the only person who can walk that path is you. So, you guys remember KZ Miller? In October, they made this video right here. The one about saying what 5 years of hormones does to a teenage girl. Where they talked about experiencing male pattern baldness. You know, because they were taking male hormones. And I don't know how to tell you, but testosterone makes you go bald. It's a thing that happens to all of us who have testosterone to some degree. It has something to do with the way that our receptors take in testosterone. It actually can cause that kind of baldness. So, anywho, none of that's super important. The point is, they're who we're talking about today. So, let's get into the fan art section first, and then we will get into the topic at hand. This one is from Leah. Back to markers and pencils for this one. Is it fucking really? Now? The next one we have is from Galaxy the Dragon. Magical Girl Suris fan art. Too lazy to color it. You don't have to color it. I'm just happy you did it. As always, everybody, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, let's go ahead and get right into the topic at hand. After you hit the like button and subscribe. So there's this whole thread that they put up recently that says, I've been thinking about my stance on trans medicine, trans ideology, etc. the past few days as I ascended out of the hazy fog of sickness and copious amounts of NyQuil. Here's where I stand as of right now. So we're going to see the stance of somebody who has basically said that they wanted to detransition but could not because the effects on their body were such that they were uncomfortable detransitioning. So let's go ahead and see what their stance is and maybe, I don't know, argue with Twitter about it. I still don't believe gender-affirming care in minors is safe or ethical. Let's go ahead and start with that one real quick. Gender-affirming care, like just saying whatever name or pronoun that the kid might want, is not safe or ethical, according to Casey Miller. When we talk about gender-affirming care for kids, we are largely talking about social transition, allowing a kid to cross-dress, allowing a kid to play with what are considered girls' toys, allowing a kid to be called a different name if they so choose. That's gender-affirming care for a kid. Casey thinks that's not ethical or safe, somehow. Said kids are very malleable and there's way too many unknowns. Right. Kids are malleable, and there's way too many unknowns. By that logic, we shouldn't try to shape children into anything. We shouldn't spend any amount of time at all trying to influence them one way or the other. And that's how you get kids that come out to be absolute brats and parents who do not spend any time taking care of their actual children. Because, oh, it's just their life. They'll pick and choose what they want. And then you end up with kids that are very, 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 very poorly behaved and don't end up functioning well in society. Like, no, I understand there's a lot of unknowns, and kids are very malleable, but sometimes, especially when it comes to, like, the kid not liking their name, for instance, it's okay to just call them something else. There's no harm for that. Letting a kid cross-dress, there's no harm in that. If it really is a phase, they'll grow out of it. Adolescence is such a turbulent time of change, and purposefully screwing with puberty and social experiment via GAC, gender affirming care, rubs me the wrong way. Well, I don't care if it rubs you the wrong way. That's what the science says is better for those kids, especially because there are certain things that happen in puberty that are very, very problematic for people if they are trans, if they don't consent to going through a puberty of the gender that they do not believe they are. I'm sorry, but it rubbing you the wrong way doesn't really give a I don't give a shit. I don't have a reason to give a shit. I know adolescence is a turbulent time, but screwing with puberty and social development, we screw with a kid's social development in a variety of ways. Some good, some bad. Adding the one more thing to the mix isn't going to cause much of an issue. Not to mention, gender-affirming care here, we're not even talking about puberty blockers itself. Puberty blockers would be something we're adding in on top of that. But if we're talking about puberty blockers, again, we know what to do with puberty blockers if the person doesn't want to be trans. They just don't take the puberty blockers anymore, and then boom, problem solved. I also don't believe that children and teens, especially those with coexisting conditions, I don't know what that means here, can truly consent to these lifelong interventions because there's no way they can comprehend what they're getting themselves into at that age. Well, it's a good thing that puberty blockers are not a lifelong intervention. It's a good thing that cross-dressing is not a lifelong intervention. It's a good thing that gender-affirming care for minors doesn't look like lifelong interventions. As for adult, they're talking about autism, aren't they? Oh, with a coexisting condition? I mean, from what I have been able to tell, there are higher rates of people who are trans in the autistic communities, but that largely comes down to the fact that people, like, with gender being a social construct and autism being something that affects the way that you operate and navigate the world socially, it makes sense that your experience of gender would be completely different if you were on the autism spectrum. Like, protecting those with mental illness, or coexisting conditions here. Sorry, we're on that part. But people with coexisting conditions, they are just going to be more likely to think of gender differently than you do. That's okay. As for adults, I feel strongly about protecting those with mental illness from being blindly affirmed by the informed consent model and making their lives more complicated than they need to be. Without any vetting, these folks will slip through the cracks. So here's the thing, though. Do you know what vetting looks like to the trans community, largely? It looks like a series of questions on a questionnaire that most people have to lie to get through anyway. If you want a good example of that, Philosophy Tube, Abigail Thorne, did a really, really good video about the process that she had to go through in order to be able to receive hormone therapy, in order to be able to receive the care she needed. We can be all gung-ho about vetting and that being wonderful all day long, but the reality of the situation is for a lot of trans people, by having that, quote, vetting system in place, the people who slip through the cracks are the trans people who need care. They're the ones that slip through the cracks. If you get trans healthcare, if you get hormones and you realize, oh, you don't like them, there are ways you can operate about that. Casey, I know that in your situation, you do not like what your body became, but simply stop taking hormones. Either take an estrogen supplement after that point, or just stop taking testosterone. Like, literally androgynize yourself, if that is what you are feeling you need to do. If you're worried about, oh, well, the male pattern baldness kicked in and I don't like it, there are cis women all the time, with or without hormones, who experience male pattern baldness. It's a weird phenomenon, but it is a thing that happens, just like they will experience an outcropping of facial hair, even though they don't want that. That can happen for a variety of reasons, a lot of them coming from polycystic ovarian disease. Might I introduce you to the concept of a wig? There are plenty of people who cannot grow a head of hair due to a variety of circumstances, some of them medical, some of them not, and they rely on wigs all the time. There's nothing wrong with relying on a wig. There's nothing bad about that. If you can use makeup, you can use a wig. Technically, they were going bald before they took tea? Oh, wait, so the tea didn't even necessarily have anything to do with it? Wow, how weird. Personally, I think very few people who are transitioning right now actually need to transition, but are doing so because it's easier than going to therapy. Regardless of my opinion, though, I'll respect y'all as people because that's how I like to do things, respecting others. You like to respect others, but you like to advocate against them through the idea of advocating for them. Like when a parent beats their child because they are just trying to make their life better, but they are inadvertently making it much worse. Sorry, Casey, I don't know. Also, I think very few people who are transitioning actually need to transition. I'm sorry, Casey, but that's not on you to judge. That's not your place. That's their place. That's their brain. I'm glad that you've suddenly discovered the ability to, read people's minds and figure that out for yourself. I still think there needs to be actual therapy requirements for adults receiving gender-affirming care. Legitimately thorough therapy where differential diagnosis are ruled out and patient is appropriately challenged. People know who they are is true until it isn't. You're right. People will always slip through the cracks. But here's the thing. Statistically, only about 1 to 2% of people, maybe even less, that are trans detransition. And of those people who detransition, there's a portion of them that retransition later. People know who they are is true until it isn't true, but by and large, most of the time, they do. By advocating for there being higher therapy requirements for adults to receive gender-affirming care, all you do is create a world where trans people who need that care will be stonewalled and prevented from getting it. You will be blocking multiple people who need that care from ever receiving it. That's all you do with this system. Personal identity in adults can be such a fluid thing, too. People have the capacity for a surprising amount of change over the course of their lives. How many people were staunch Democrats until recently? How many people grew up in the church only to be atheists later? I think it's very funny how you specifically said staunch Democrats until recently, as opposed to Republicans until recently, when I'm pretty sure there's actually a higher propensity of Republicans who have, at the very least, gone the centrist route, thanks to the prevalence of the MAGA movement. Personal identity can be a very fluid thing. You're right. Gender fluid people exist, and they operate in a variety of ways. Sometimes they use hormones to androgynize themselves, so it's easier to not experience dysphoria on both ends of the spectrum. People do have a capacity for a surprising amount of change, but you know what you do to make it to where they can navigate through that change? You let them do what they're going to do. You let them have that choice, as opposed to, I don't know, advocating for a system that would stonewall them away from making that choice themselves. Are there cases where people experience true lifelong gender dysphoria? Sure, I'm willing to make that concession, but I don't think it's a lot of people transitioning right now, especially the younger folks. I think it's a case of mistaken identity. Again, we have the statistics for this. It's about 1 to 2% of people who detransition. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to talk out my ass. Hold on. It is 8%. 8% of respondents to the study that I'm looking at right here detransitioned temporarily or permanently. Rates of detransition was higher in transgender women than transgender men, but the most common reason cited for detransitioning was pressure from a parent, or transitioning was too hard, or harassment and discrimination, or trouble getting a job was found. Literally 29%, 33%, 31%, 36%. These are high fucking percentages of people who detransition who literally would not have done so because, like, they would not have done so if society had not been forcing it down their throats that they shouldn't have been. Casey Mill, I don't think you understand. You are part of the reason for this, and that's not a good thing. This leads to statistics like this, which leads to a different kind of statistic I can't talk about on YouTube. And that becomes a you problem, Casey. I think there could be a lot of reasons why people think they're trans when that might not be the case. Overlapping symptoms, again, I don't know what this means. Peer pressure. This is the social contagion theory for transitioning, something that we've largely debunked on this channel before. The desire to be gender conforming or straight, community, etc. The desire to be gender conforming or straight would lead people to be trans? What? That's weird. The online trans community informs all prospective transitioners the same. Yeah, because the online trans community, for the most part, with a few exceptions, basically holds the position that, hey, we can't read your brain. I say we, I'm not trans. That community itself that I'm talking about here, from what I've experienced, largely go, they can't read your brain. So the fact that they can't read your brain means that they will advocate for you and affirm you until the point where you don't want to be affirmed. That's what happens. In online trans spaces, if you're merely thinking you might possibly be trans, then you are. So this one I actually do agree with. This one I actually do agree with. And I say that because in my community, the fact that I use a female VTuber model has led a lot of people to believe that I'm trans. I've said multiple times I am not, and so people have been led to believe that I am now an egg because, well, one day I will be trans. One day I will accept that I'm trans. No, even an ex of mine would do this. And one day I had to literally go, no. Aren't you gender apathetic, though? And cis. I am cis and don't care. If I woke up tomorrow as a girl, I also wouldn't care. Being gender apathetic doesn't make me trans or gender nonconforming. Like, I'm still cis. I still identify as the gender I was assigned at birth. I've been called an egg multiple times because of my VTuber model and because of my apathy. And I don't know how many times I have to say I'm not. So if there's one thing I will give Casey here, this one I believe is true because I've experienced. And I wish it would fucking stop. But I know it's not going to. If you're broken and in pain and see all these people living supposedly happier lives after transitioning, and you just had your trans epiphany, why wouldn't you buy in? Yeah, and then if you decide that you're not trans, you just detransition. That happens. If you're depressed and have fully bought in that this is who you are and what you need, and that you need to transition, it's dangerous to walk into a clinic and walk out with a prescription for hormones. People will say and do what they need in order to get what they want and need. Yeah, that's why no matter how much you stonewall in therapy, people will find a way to get their hormones. Better to let... Okay, so which is better? Which is better? Which is better, Casey? Is it better to be a person who thinks they're trans and never gets the opportunity to act on it and is tormented by that fact for years? Or is it better for them to be able to go on hormones, see how they affect them, realize they may or may not be trans, but they've taken that journey, and then detransition? Which is better? Is it better for people to have had the freedom and the ability to try? Or is it better for those people to just be blocked by the oh-so-caring Casey Miller? I would think that it's better to let people do what they will with their bodies. You may not like the things they do with their bodies, and that's okay. They're not your bodies. They will gloss over the details, ignore red flags, or tell them things like, I won't regret this because I know I'm right, or X won't happen to me. And in the current system, providers will write the script as requested with very little pushback. Will they, though? In the current system, I know plenty of people who are trans who've been fighting for hormones and surgeries for years, either with their insurance companies or with their providers, and have been met with a lot of pushback. There may be individual scenarios where you can get very little pushback, but that has not been the case for all of them. It's not a systemic issue there. Jen says this gets more patients through the door, but doesn't serve them the best. Again, people know who they are until they don't, and when they don't really know what they think they do, that's where mistakes can be made that last a lifetime. I know that there are cases where these mistakes can happen. There are cases where people detransition. But again, as we showed, we looked at the stats. It is a small amount of people, and of that small amount of people that even detransition, it's people like you, Casey, who create the world where they felt pressure to detransition in the first place. There's plenty of life-changing decisions that people take early on in life that can fuck them over for the world. Student loans for one of them, getting into a car and crashing it into a Walmart, having fucking children. There's all kinds of life-altering decisions that it is better if we let people have the ability to try to do, and then they can learn for themselves, than having somebody who's just such a concerned advocate trying to bar them from their own personal freedoms. But that's the entirety of Casey's thread. All the comments in it are all things like, eloquently spoken. I read your thread and I like your take. Don't listen to the inevitable hate that will be thrown your way. Beautifully said. This is how I view it myself. So well said. Aww. Everybody loves a pick. Everyone. Again, I recognize I can't get in Casey's head. I don't know Casey's motivation for all of this, but I know that their conclusions are wrong, because we have the statistics to show that the merit behind their conclusions is meritless. And as long as the science is on our side, as long as the statistics are on our side, then I'm going to continue to advocate the exact same way I have until data proves otherwise. For the time being, and for the foreseeable future, if you think you're trans, explore that. Figure it out. You might not be, you might be. But the only person who can walk that path is you. Your journey being trans may look like hormones. It may look like social transitioning. It may look like voice therapy. It may look like a lot of things. That's your journey to take. Don't let somebody else take it from you. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.